It's great to be joined today by James Underdown, who is the founder and director of the Independent Investigations Group based in Los Angeles, California. They offer a $100,000 prize to anyone who can show compelling evidence of a paranormal or supernatural power or event using controlled scientific protocol. We'll talk about that in the second part of our interview. James, you've done so many interesting things with regard to the paranormal, psychics, etc. How did you first get into this line of work?
Well, I was appointed as the executive director of the Center for Inquiry, so that landed me in a world that dealt with these sort of things right away. But I had an interest in it for a long time before that. When I was a kid, I remember going to see Eric von Daniken speak outside Chicago. He was the one who wrote this book called Chariots of the Gods, and he proposed that the Earth had been visited many times by alien creatures.
Sure.
So I was interested in that, and I read some book about a book called Super Learning that at the one of the last chapters, I think, taught people how to exercise their psychic power. So I had a real interest in this stuff, and then after I discovered Skeptical Inquirer magazine and started learning about what was really going on with these sorts of claims, it kind of blew my mind that all this stuff could sound so plausible but not be. So when I took the job, we actually I founded this group, the Independent Investigations Group, so that people could get some hands-on experience and look into some of these things ourselves.
And one of those areas is the concept of psychics. And you've actually appeared on the Dr. Phil show, and you were presented to a small audience as a so-called psychic, and then a so-called real psychic did readings for the same group. And this really comes down to the skill of cold reading, right? I mean, talk about how you prepared for that and your experience doing that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love the fact that you keep saying so-called, because that's a good warning for people. When I originally said yes to the Dr. Phil show, I mean, I'm perfectly able to, go and talk about the issues of whether psychics exist or not. But when they asked us if there were ways to test psychics for the purpose of the show. And I said, yeah, there are lots of different ways. And I started rattling off these ways. And they kept saying, well, no. What we really want to do is have you or somebody give a reading and then somebody else give a reading just as you described. And at the time I said, yes, I had someone else in mind, one of the members of our group, who is a very experienced cold reader. But that person turned out not to be available for the reading. So I had to do it myself. And I had never done that before. I mean, I know a little bit about how it's done and everything, but
yeah,
it's one of those things that, takes a lot of practice. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. So, I sort of just reviewed everything I thought I knew about how to do cold reading. So by the time I got to that little studio on Monday morning, I was as ready as I was going to be.
And is it true that after it was revealed that you were, I mean, I don't even know what to call it, but I call it just messing with people, and you don't really think you're a psychic, that a supposed real psychic said, no, James is actually a real psychic, he's just bitter, or something like that. I mean, did that actually happen?
Yeah, that actually happened on camera during the show. And oh my God, I mean, what do you say to that? Yeah, it's funny too, because the people changed their story. The people who I read, or some of them anyway, some of them at least believe me. Three people cried during the course of my reading. I was posing as a medium who was making contact with people's dead relatives and friends. And in the course of my reading, my first time ever reading, three people cried. And even some of the stuff was cut out. One of the cameramen said, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. All these other things. So it worked, at least a percentage of these people, believe me. But then when the time for the show to come and they had already been told that I was faking it, they said, well, we didn't believe him in the first place. And we knew all along that he wasn't as good as the other person. And I said, well, of course, the other person who did that had, thousands of readings under her belt. Of course, she's going to be better at it. But the
Right.
fact is, you believe the first timer at it because it's mostly because you wanted to believe this.
James, by the way, your microphone is hitting your shirt collar a little bit, so just be aware of that because it is making some noise. This isn't
Okay.
just limited to psychic type stuff. You were on the Oprah Winfrey Network. They had this miracle detective show, and
Yeah.
there was a story of a supposed angelic apparition which supposedly cured a 14-year-old severely disabled child at a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. So you were sent in there, and what did it actually turn out was the reality of that curing?
Well, the claim was when this girl was in dire straits and the family was deciding whether or not to pull her off her respirator, it was helping her breathe. She had a collapsed lung and some other issues, in addition to being severely disabled in other ways. When that decision was about to be made, they saw the nurses or somebody in the room saw a light image on the outside of the ICU area. So the doors going into the ICU open, and this sort of three-lobed image that looks like an angel appeared. They took the girl off the ventilator and she could breathe on her own, and she eventually got better. And so they attributed that light image to the curing of the girl. Now, there was a couple of problems with it. First of all, they said that it was an interior hallway, which is correct, but there were no light sources that could have allowed for that light image to appear on the monitor. And by the way, they took a picture of the monitor so we could look at it in some detail to see what it looked like. And when I got there, we looked to this hallway down just after the entrance there, and there was a little sliver of opening between where those doors were and an exterior window, which was very interesting. And then I fortunately I had some astronomer friends I could call, and we found out the direction of which way the building was facing, and we knew what time of the year it was. So I said, "Where's the sun coming from during this week?" And sure enough, it's coming right down the pipe. It's like exactly facing the southwest direction where it needed to be to do that image. And then we came back to LA, and in the course of the show, we recreated that hallway and just stuck a theater light down there to mimic the sun. And sure enough, bam! It made almost exactly the same image as what appeared on the monitor.
So these are a couple of the claims you've worked on, but you also do work when it comes to pseudoscience claims, consumer products that make claims that are not actually possible or backed by evidence, etc. What is the sort of overarching theme that you tend to find when looking at both pseudoscience and sort of the medical world, product claims, etc.? I mean, how would you sort of summarize that aspect of your work?
Yeah, we try to focus on the things that are making claims that they're using the language of science to sound legitimate, but they are making extraordinary claims that are contrary to what our current scientific knowledge says. I'll give you a couple examples. One is the widely used product of homeopathy.
Yes.
It's very likely that your homeopathic medicine, in some cases, in the more seriously diluted cases, that you may not even get a single molecule of the active ingredient
Correct.
in your homeopathic medicine. So the physics of it alone, but without even talking about anything else, the physics of it alone suggests that it not only is not working, but it couldn't possibly work. And then we see other things. I mean, some of this stuff just comes to our attention. I see pro athletes, basketball players, football players, baseball players, wearing certain necklaces around their neck or wearing these power balance bracelets.
Hmm.
And so one time, Yahoo News came to us and said, we'd like to test this. And Olympic gymnast Dominique Dawes showed up. And so we created a test that sought to find out whether the power balance bracelet itself made any difference in athletic performance. So we ran 16 people through this obstacle course 4 times. Only once did they have the actual power balance bracelet on. Each time they wore some kind of bracelet, and they never knew if it was the actual power balance bracelet or the facsimile. So, we wanted to see if the scores got better when they actually wore the real bracelet. So before, in that case, we didn't even go into, the physics and the science of whether it could work. We just wanted to see if it did work and if it made a difference. And so everybody went through the course 4 times, and there was absolutely no difference between the fakes and the real ones. Surprise, surprise.
All right, let's pick up the conversation there. We're speaking with James Underdown, founder and director of the Independent Investigations Group in LA. We will continue the conversation with him tomorrow. We're continuing our conversation with James Underdown, who's the founder and director of the Independent Investigations Group based in Los Angeles, California. We've talked about psychics, we've talked about homeopathy, and so many other things. Let's talk now, James, about this $100,000 prize that is available through your organization to anyone who can show compelling evidence of a paranormal or supernatural power or event using controlled scientific protocol. I think this is interesting in a couple of ways, and some in my audience might know that the James Randi Foundation has been offering $1 million prize, which sounds to be pretty similar to what you are sort of setting up here. I have a couple of questions, and the first is, what do you define as controlled scientific protocol? And number two, how do you deal with inherently this sort of reality that many people who believe in the sorts of claims that you debunk will say you can't really prove that it's not true, and the sort of complexity of proving a negative inherently?
Yeah, well, I mean, to start out with, the controlled environment, that the point of all that is to eliminate all the trickery. Magicians, for instance, or mentalists who are knowingly doing a trick need they need to be in control of their environment because they're doing a trick and they need to set certain things up. And in order for them to cheat convincingly, they have to be in control of the situation. All we're seeking to do is to eliminate all the cheating aspects of it and let it boil down to the actual skill or not. So for instance, if we're testing a telepath, say, we want to cut off all the modes of communication between the sender and receiver of whatever they claim to be sending across. So we don't want them to have transmitters in their pocket. We don't want them to be able to use sound or visual cues or anything else to communicate with the other person. That's all the control environment means. And what was the other question was about?
Well, so part two is the sort of just inherent difficulty of, psychics are often asked, there's $1 million available to you, really 1.1 million, right? 1 million from James Randi and another 100,000 from you. If you can demonstrate in a controlled environment that you really are a psychic. And when you ask psychics, supposed psychics, why they haven't done it, they say, I'm not in this to make money, or that's not how it works, or there's some such explanation. But there's an inherent complexity in the difficulty of proving that someone is not a psychic definitively, isn't there?
Well, I would argue by saying, technically we are not, by proving that one person cannot exhibit such a skill, technically we're not proving that it's impossible, but we're proving that this person, or demonstrating that this person at this time cannot do it.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, all we're doing is time after time after time showing that the individuals who completely believe, by the way, we have not had one person trying to fake it, people who are sincere in their beliefs 100% of the time have not been able to show these abilities.
And how does that
So,
work? I
yeah,
mean, tell us a story of one person that came in claiming to be able to do X, and sort of how it went, and maybe most interestingly, how they reacted at the end. How did they explain why they weren't able to pass the test?
yeah. Well, I'll give you one example. Two guys took a bus from Tacoma, Washington, all the way to Los Angeles to be tested in a telepathic challenge.
Hmm.
Now, they said that they could do, I think it was something like, we could flip, these were just plain playing cards, a regular deck of playing cards. They said they could guess 47 out of 52 cards correctly, which, by the way, uh, probability wise is off the charts. It's in the gazillions to one to
Right.
be able to do that on chance alone. So if we're doing our luck alone, if they can do it, it would look pretty good on their part. And by the way, if you guess the same card every time, you're guaranteed of getting at least one right. Um, the guy got zero right out of 52, and he was a little befuddled. He was sort of couldn't understand why it didn't happen, and he just kind of shrugged his shoulders and then went on his business.
But isn't that bizarre?
Other
I mean, in other words, what was that guy doing in the privacy of his home where he was guessing 47 out of 52 that would leave him so confused as to why he all of a sudden couldn't do it when he shows up in Los Angeles?
Yeah, that's a great question. And usually, I mean, we always tell these people, test yourself at home first. Use this exact same test that you're going to do for us at home. Because if you can't do it at home, you're not going to be able to do it in front of a bunch of strangers either. But I think what happens is, one of the classic things that we skeptics always try to tell people is, a lot of times people remember the hits and they forget the misses. You're standing in front of a bank of elevators and you say, that one's going to open next, and it opens next, and you say, oh my God, I have psychic ability, or it happens, twice in a row or something. The next 40 times you do it, or, the next half of the times, whatever, you forget that you missed it, and all you remember is your successes. So you get it in your head that you have this ability.
How do you test a psychic? Someone comes in, and we've done it in our studio, and we had a so-called psychic come in and do a cold reading of a former employee and of me, and it was just a totally abortive display of no skill even whatsoever, never mind psychic abilities. But that wasn't a sort of scientific or controlled test. It was just this person seems to be wildly guessing and is wrong. How do you go about, what are the conditions for testing a psychic?
Well, it depends on specifically what the psychic's claims are, and they're all different. And that's one of our big jobs, is to try to narrow people down exactly what is it exactly you say you can do. Can you predict the future? Can you tell me something specific about myself? The way a lot of the psychics operate, who charge people to come in their storefronts or whatever, is they just make lots and lots of guesses. And, there's this technique called cold reading.
You still there, James? We're having a bit of a connection issue where you're kind of breaking up. Can you still hear me okay? Oh boy.
Which is giving the appearance to consult a, sound a little fuzzy though. Could have been might have had a moment of internet fuzziness.
Yeah, I think we're back, James. You were talking about cold reading is where we lost you.
So yeah, cold reading is the ability to give the impression that someone is consulting with some outside power to get this information. But really, it's just a technique of making lots of guesses, using a certain language that makes it sound like you're being right, even though you're sort of getting an ambivalent answer, And it's reading the physical appearance and reaction of a person to know if you're on the right track in the process of your storytelling as you're giving information. So, in the case of a regular psychic reading, there's really a fair amount to know, and that's a little bit tougher to test because there's so many different versions of what psychics do, and we really have to define it first before we could come up with a test
In
for it.
your experience, James, are psychics okay being unable to see the person that they're reading? Because that would do a lot as far as the sort of constant reading of the visual response from the person, or will they say, no, I need to be able to see the person?
No, there are plenty of them that just do these things on the phone, and you don't need to. I think it's a help to be able to see someone. You could look at how someone dresses, or what sort of haircut they have, or even what color their skin is, might be able to help you give a better reading.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not necessary. I know a woman who gave a $1,000 reading to someone on the phone, and she spent 55 minutes just chattering away and making literally hundreds of guesses
Hmm.
for the person, and got some of them right.
Hey, on a personal level, like I'm skeptical by nature, and I've never seen demonstrated evidence of psychic abilities, but I'm completely open to the possibility that in 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30 years, there may be something which would fall under the umbrella of what we now would consider to be psychic abilities. It would be demonstrated scientifically, and it would be by some mechanism that we as humans don't yet understand, but could well exist. What's your sense of the possibility of that?
Uh, it's certainly possible. I mean, science doesn't know everything about everything. So, yes, you have to open up the slight possibility of that. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case.
Hmm.
What's more likely going to be the case, and the things we have to watch out for, is that someone will be able to implant something into their body and be able to transfer information that way. Or we're even finding this out in, with paraplegics and stuff, where you can hardwire parts of your brain and actually control something that happens
Mm.
outside of you, which in a fuzzy sense might be considered telekinetic ability, the ability to move something, but it's not really. It's technology aided. But it doesn't look like the organic parts of our body, our brains particularly, have anything in them that would allow such a thing to occur.
James Underdown, founder and director of the independent investigations group, $100,000 available to you or anybody you know if you can show compelling evidence of a paranormal or supernatural power or event under controlled protocol. James, a real pleasure speaking with you today.
The pleasure's been mine. Thanks for having me on.